The problem was not the virus. The problem was the fact that we were broke when the virus happened. And then we had to go even deeper into debt to prevent all the defaults and a financial crisis that would have been worse than the one we had in 2008. And I think the reason that the US dollar didn't collapse following QE 1, 2, and 3 is because the Fed was successful in convincing the world that it could reverse policy, that it did have an exit strategy, that it was temporary. That was a lie, but the world believed it. Well, the Fed can't even tell that lie with a straight face anymore. And even if it tried, nobody would believe them. I think everybody now believes that interest rates can never go back to normal because of the abnormal amount of debt. See, the problem isn't the COVID disease, but the COVID cure. All the extra debt and money printing that we had to fight COVID is now a much bigger problem than the COVID itself. And even if we have vaccines that manage to cure this disease, we're not going to cure the economy of what really ails it, which is all the debt and all the money printing. So this is going to continue long after the disease comes to an end. And since I believe that people realize or will realize that there's no end in sight to the money printing and the debt, I think the bottom is going to drop out of the dollar. And where I agree with Harry is that we're going to see a massive deflation of this bubble, right? All bubbles have to deflate. The air is going to come out. But the reality is we're living in a fiat world. This is not the 1930s. The dollar is not backed by anything. The dollar is not gold. And so what the US government is going to do to keep the air from coming out of the stock market bubble, the real estate bubble, to maintain the illusion of a sound economy and to facilitate US government spending. Because the government can only spend if it can borrow. And the only lender is the Fed. Because the world now no longer wants to lend the US government money at a rate that the US government can afford to pay. There's so much debt now that rates have to be zero. In fact, in many cases, zero is too high. You have a lot of calls for negative rates. But the only entity dumb enough to loan money to the US Treasury at such a low rate is the Federal Reserve, because it just creates the money out of thin air. It doesn't have to work hard to get the money, right? It just creates it. So it doesn't matter. So it's willing to buy US Treasuries. But as the world realizes that the Fed has gone from the lender of last resort to the lender of only resort, the bottom drops out of the dollar. And so the government is willing to sacrifice the US dollar in order to prop up all these bubbles and in order to allow the US government to continue to spend money. So if you want to measure assets, if you want to take a look at real estate prices, if you want to look at stock prices, bond prices, all prices are going to collapse if you want to measure them in terms of real money, that real money being gold. So if, a stock is, you can buy a stock for a tenth of an ounce of gold, if that's how much a share costs, well, maybe you'll be able to buy that same share for 1/100th of an ounce of gold, right? You can see a 90% decline in the value of US stocks priced in gold. I mean, we've had that before. We had that type of decline in the 1930s. And in fact, we had that type of decline during the 1970s, measured in gold. Now, the 1970s, we had all this inflation because we were no longer on the gold standard. So you didn't see that type of decline nominally, but measured in gold prices, that's exactly what you saw. And I think we're going to see the same type of decline again, because the United States is in far worse shape economically now than it was in 1970. And so this bubble is far bigger, and you have to have a much bigger adjustment. In fact, what I think is going to happen to gold is that I think gold is going to end up being remonetized. I think as we have a loss of confidence worldwide in this fiat system, because all the currencies that are backed by the dollar are also going to be in trouble when their backing is collapsing. I mean, if your currency is backed by the dollar and the dollar is backed by nothing, and now the confidence has been lost in the dollar, then there's nothing backing up these other currencies. So I think just the way the world, or the US rather, led the world off the gold standard and got the world to adopt the dollar standard, the world is going to reject the dollar and return to gold. And once again, gold is going to be the primary reserve for all the world's currencies.